My experience with mental health has been a bit of a journey, really. I definitely had to deal with levels of anxiety, high levels of anxiety when I was a kid that sort of presented more as a bit of separation anxiety from my mum. But, as I sort of got a little bit older, so 10, 11, 12, and I was touring with representative teams, I would really struggle. They stopped selecting me for representative teams because I could not compete at the level that they needed me to compete at, because quite often I'd be crying myself to sleep on the road if my parents weren't there. I'd be just so worked up that I couldn't actually function normally. So this was when I was a kid. So I guess for me, having to deal with that when I was that young, it was difficult because I knew that as a basketball player, if I wanted to be, the greatest, I would have to travel and I'd have to sort of be away from my parents. So there was a lot of sort of work that I had to do on myself when I was a kid, before I even started this journey, which was incredible, but it was hard. So I might start there. I headed overseas when I was 19 to play in the WNBA in America. And then women's sport, it's one of those things where we don't get paid millions and millions of dollars per season. We have to play year round to make money to be able to survive being a professional athlete. So for me, my journey was sort of set. I knew that once I went over to the WNBA, I'd be playing a season in Australia, I'd be playing with the national team over in Europe whenever we got opportunities. And then when the opportunities presented itself, I would eventually go and play over in Europe or China for a little bit of extra cash in the off season. So I guess I'd always had a little bit of anxiety traveling. I hated being away from home, as I sort of said earlier, but I had worked on that stuff and I sort of found ways of controlling that to a degree, but I was always uncomfortable. But it was just something that I had to deal with, and I was being contracted to be an athlete and compete, and that's what I did. In about 2008, I had been at this time I'd been traveling from America straight to Russia or South Korea, and then back to America, and then World Championships or an Olympics. So if I was coming back to Australia, it may have been for 1 or 2 weeks at a time. So I really didn't have time to focus on my body, on my mental health. And my life felt like it was crumbling around me when I was overseas. And I mean, to the point where I just couldn't breathe. I woke up one morning and I'd lost 20 kilos. We'd just lost the gold medal. We'd won the silver medal at Beijing Olympics, and I had to fly home that following day. And my parents picked me up from the airport and I couldn't speak. I just had this knot in my stomach that was like, I could not even, whenever I tried to talk or tried to start a conversation with my parents, I'd just start crying. I couldn't eat, and I just got deeper and deeper into this sort of well. I had to have surgery on my ankle because it had sort of flared up. And so I knew that I only had sort of a week or 2 at home to recover from that before I had to head overseas again. And Mum and Dad ended up taking me down to the South Coast because they were so worried about me. They didn't want to leave me at my apartment in Sydney alone. So they took me down to their home in Turos Head and basically just waited. They just sat in the house and waited for me to come out and talk to them. And often, I mean, for the first week, it really was about 4 o'clock when we could have a vino on the deck, and I could just sit there and then feel okay, feel a bit relaxed, and then start talking again. And I mean, this probably happened for 3 or 4 days, and I didn't get out of bed for any other reason other than that. And then, slowly but surely I started talking, I started going out fishing with them, and things, started to look up. Unfortunately, I had to head back to Russia. And once I did that, we had to go over there for the money. The money was so good and I couldn't say, no, I'm not doing it. So went over there, and within a couple of weeks, I just sort of pitted out again. I was at my bottom, at rock bottom. on antidepressants and just trying to get through. I spent 7 months over in Russia that year and I just kept losing weight. I was in a really destructive relationship and I've never been that low in my life. So how I coped, how I got through, I do not know. Because those were the days too where it was middle of winter in Russia. Sun wouldn't come up till 10 o'clock in the morning, and we'd already been in the gym by that point, and then the sun would go down by 2. So I'd get home from training, I'd go straight to bed, and then I'd get back up and it was dark again, and then I'd be back into training. So living with that kind of depression and anxiety, and I mean, it was a time in my life that it could have gone one way or the other. And for me, fortunately, I knew that once I got out of Russia, I had to start doing some serious work on myself and be comfortable with myself alone, on my own. And that's what I did. So from then on, I really made a commitment to myself to be focused on, I guess, never getting that low again, never doing that to my parents again, never shutting them out. And because that's sort of what happened. You know, in my career, I just sort of focused on basketball and, you know, the relationship that I was in at the time, and I didn't focus on the things that I needed to be healthy and well, which was, it was a real learning experience for me. So anyway, that was probably one of my darkest times. And being an athlete too, especially back then, we didn't talk about this stuff. This wasn't something that I felt comfortable talking about to anybody because I felt like it was a weakness that would impact my contracts, how people saw me, the stigma of mental health. But I just couldn't cope and I was not dealing well. And fortunately, I had our Australian doctor at the time who saw that, and he sort of put his hand up to help and really made an effort just to keep talking to me and keep that dialogue open, even when I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. I couldn't even talk to my closest friends. So that was a time in my life that as much as I get really upset thinking about it and talking about it, it actually helped me grow into the person that I am today, and finding coping mechanisms, and also knowing that my parents and the people that I love, when they're close to me, this doesn't happen. So I really have relied very heavily on them. And yeah, I think that's given me the opportunity to sort of succeed post-sport. So moving on, sort of 2012-ish, my body started breaking down, and it's been very well documented that particularly in the last few years of my career, you know, I had many surgeries. I think I had close to 15 on my knee. I'd been taking a lot of prescription medication just to deal with pain. You know, I'd sort of get an operation on my knee and then I'd go back and train. And things were really kind of, it was hard because all I was doing was training, going to bed, getting up, training, going to bed, because my knee was so painful that I just couldn't do anything else. And I didn't want to do anything else. So I sort of got stuck in a bit of a really vicious cycle where, you know, I was taking prescription medication to train. After training, my knee would get sore, so there'd be more prescription medication. Then I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I'd have to take sleeping pills to go to bed and then get up and train again. So I was in a pretty bad cycle, and this went on for a couple of years, and that definitely deteriorated my mental health as well. I found that once I retired, once I made the decision to quit the game because of the injuries, I made a decision to quit the prescription medication as well, and all of a sudden I was out of this fog that I feel like I was in for probably 20 years. So that to me was a really big lesson as well, that prescription medication for me was just a no-no, and having to again find my happiness and find what motivates me and inspires me to live each day to the fullest has got nothing to do with medication of any type. So that was my journey, and that has definitely brought me to this place now. And to be able to talk about it, it's frightening, but it's also, I'm glad that I get to share this with you because it was not all rosy at all. So anyway, post basketball, I had two little boys, which they're everything, and I finally feel complete. In fact, I feel more complete than I ever did as an athlete, and I was always longing for something and wanting more. And once I had my first child, I knew straight away that I was meant to be a mum, and this was probably, what I was longing for so long, which it's sort of weird and cliche to say that, but I found that focusing on myself for so long and making sure that I was had the perfect preparation for every game or every training, I got so sick of worrying about myself that being able to focus and devote all my time and attention to my kids is the best thing that I could ever possibly do. So I feel really fortunate to be able to share this as well with them. This isolation time at the moment, it's an interesting time, and I really feel for a lot of athletes. I think that particularly female basketballers and soccer players, or whoever, going overseas, going to different countries and playing, you're often isolated on your own, in your own apartment, between trainings and games, and you don't speak the language, you're away from home. So I feel like we've probably lived isolation to the fullest, but in saying that, the athletes at the moment, what they're going through, having to improvise their trainings, having to be at home and not getting ready for Tokyo at the moment, I can't imagine how they're coping. And, I guess if I had any advice at all, it would be just to stay moving, like try and get out and walk, try and just keep moving as much as you possibly can, keep your mind thinking, get online, do a course, do something. I mean, as athletes too, it's often we don't take breaks when we need to. So a forced break, as much as it's painful and it's hard, it could be doing your body a world of good. So, I mean, if you look at it from that light, but you just got to try and stay connected, try and stay moving. I really just feel for you guys, and I hope you're all good.